Anyway, let's bring in our next guest, Manish Mehta, who's nice enough to come on. And we have obviously been somewhat critical of the stuff that he's written in the Daily News, but this is one of those shows where, we're going to tell it to your face. And Manish, it's Michael and Don. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, guys, how are you? I have my bulletproof vest on.
Well, we will not be rude. But let me ask you this, Manish. Sure. I'm not that bright, but it just seems to me in reading your stories in the news that you don't think the Jets should hire Doug Marrone. Am I on the right track?
I think that's accurate. Look, Mike, I know you're close with Doug, and I know you guys go back, I guess, to when you were kids. I look at it pretty cut and dry. To me, he's an average coach. I can't speak to what he was like with the Jets 10+ years ago. I wasn't around for that. I obviously can't speak to anything that happened before that. But I've only confined my stories to what he was like in Buffalo, and I spoke to people in the organization, people out of the organization, people that interacted with him really over the past 2 years. So everything that you've read over the past several days is really based on that. And I can't really speak to what he was like many years prior to that.
Now, I have no relationship with Doug Marrone, and I'm siding with Michael because I agree with him, because it'd be easier to disagree. It makes for better radio. But I just don't see him as being any better or worse than any of the other candidates. So I just wondered why it just seems so personal that you seem to attack every negative aspect of him when there's been plenty of reports and people we've had, Bill Polian on, that we've had, who've talked highly about him and believe that he is a good coach and believe that he would be a good hire. So why do you seem the need to only report on the negative instead of the positive if you don't really care who coaches the team in the first place?
Well, Don, I talked to people in Buffalo, and if people in Buffalo were going to give me a glowing review of Doug Marrone, I would have reported that. But you got to really believe that the people in Buffalo aren't going to have anything positive to say about him because they were left high and dry.
And also, Manish, if Buffalo didn't want him, why was Pagula negotiating an extension with him?
Look, I can't speak to how far the negotiations went and who said what toward the end and why Doug Marrone decided to opt out. The specifics of that. But what I can say is that, and this is to your point, Don, that do people have an axe to grind in Buffalo? Obviously, if you look at it from afar, some people may have an axe to grind. I don't know if the players necessarily would have an axe to grind, and I think it was Fred Jackson, who's one of the most respected guys in that locker room, actually came out yesterday and told ESPN Buffalo maybe that he was disappointed by the way that Marrone handled his exit. And I know there was a former Syracuse assistant coach, and you can debate the merits about does that guy have an axe to grind because he was fired by Doug Marrone a couple years into his tenure with Marrone in Syracuse, and that's a fair point as well. But, again, if there were people in the building that I spoke to that had positive thing, quote-unquote, positive things to say about Doug Marrone, I would have reported it. I think there was an NFL.com report that came out yesterday from Albert Breer in which he said that Marrone had a growing reputation of being a complainer and complaining about the personnel, and that caused friction with the front office. And that's kind of in line with what I had heard as well. So, are there agendas for people up there? Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that, without a doubt. But, again, if I had found people in the organization that were willing to tell me positive things about him, I absolutely would have written it.
Well, there's a couple of things that I just took exception to. And when you say that Doug and I are friends, I'll repeat it for those that have listened. I grew up with him from the age of 12 to 25. Since then, we've had very little contact. If we see each other in a public, it's not like we exchange Christmas cards and stuff like that. I just know that the person that grew up from 12 to 25 was brought up the right way and was a legitimate person. And the thing that struck me is that you used the word classless about the way he exited Buffalo. And I don't quite understand what his recourse would have been when they negotiated to the nth hour for the opt-out, and then he opted out, and the Bills released it on Twitter, and none of the team is there, Manish. So how is he going to get in contact with all of them at once other than a mass text?
Well, I don't really disagree with the mass text portion of it because you're absolutely right. The guys are scattered across the country. You can't have a team meeting when things are happening so fast. But Michael, you used to be a reporter. You know how things get out. And at 6:08, ESPN reported that Marrone had opted out. And right. I believe it was a few minutes later, the Bills' official Twitter feed had reported as well that Marrone was no longer going to be with the team. And then 9 minutes after ESPN reported that that he was going to opt out. They reported that the Jets were the leading candidate. So here's my beef.
So he probably has a really good agent, Manish.
Look, I'm not going to comment on sourcing and things like that. But what I will say, Michael, is that the first person to know that he's going to opt out in this situation is Doug Marrone. He would have been very easy to send out a mass text before that information leaked out. And that's just my personal belief. You know, other people have disagreed with that. They said it doesn't really matter if you reach out to the players after they've already heard it or read it on social media. And that's their prerogative. That's their choice. I think if you're a head coach, especially a head coach, and Michael, I'm sure you know this, after the last game against New England, Marrone had this very impassioned speech about winning and not quitting, even though that game really didn't mean anything to the Patriots. Brady only played a half, and Gronk and Edelman and a lot of other starters didn't play. The bottom line is that after that game, Marrone talked to his players and said, you didn't quit, you played to the end, and I hope that when your kids are growing up and playing sports, that you will teach them the value of never quitting. And then he obviously broke them down with a Bills family, 1, 2, 3, something to that respect. So 72 hours later, when you exit in that fashion and your players have to read on a public forum that you're gone before you tell them, that's why I thought it was.
But in fairness, Manish, the way his contract was structured, anybody with the Bills who signed that contract is an idiot to give him an opt-out if there was a change in ownership when the owner was 95. And if Forbes, was covering this, if Doug Marrone didn't opt out and take $5 free million, then he'd be a moron. So, I mean, he did the only thing that a smart businessman would do. He's taking money, and now he could get more money if he gets another job and probably make $9 million this year. And also, players leave and forget about, an attachment to the Bills. It's a business, Manish.
No, I agree with you. And what you just said is absolutely true. I mean, he could come out smelling like roses if he, ends up pocketing whatever, $7, $8, $9 million in total this year. But it was just 2 years into his contract. He did have 2 years remaining. I think he could have coached this team in 2015.
But then he would have given up the free money.
Well, what's more important at that point? At that point, you have to value what's more important, maximizing your dollars for 2015 or trying to see something through that you started 2 years ago.
But he's not seeing it through because they're going to bring in another GM, Manish, which he didn't even know who that GM was going to be.
Well, they haven't fired Doug Whaley.
That what?
They haven't fired Doug Whaley.
Well, believe me, you'll see they will bring in somebody that will be doing the GMing other than Doug.
Well, so you're saying that his future past 2014 was in doubt? Because I don't think it was. I think he would have been the head coach in 2015.
No. He absolutely would have been, but he didn't know who was going to be working above him getting the talent.
No, I understand that. I don't follow your point.
Well, why would you stay if you're going to get $5 free million and you don't know who the guy is going to be above you procuring the talent because the owner's going to pick that guy?
Well, because you think you're a good coach, and I would assume that Doug Marrone thinks he's a good coach, and you're entering the third year of a 4-year contract. So if you play well as a team in 2015, why would you have any doubts that you would be back beyond 2015?
Because he's getting $5 million for free, Manish.
No, but that's you're focusing on the finances. I understand that. I'm in agreement with you.
Well, but it stops right there. It is a business for everybody.
But what I don't understand, how does this affect whether he'd be a good or bad coach for the Jets? I mean, look how the Jets got Bill Parcells originally. He didn't even fly home with the Patriots after their Super Bowl loss to the Packers. Or the way Herman Edwards lied right to my face that he was leaving the Jets.
I get what you guys are saying. I think you guys are maybe something's getting lost in translation. I'm not saying that he's a bad fit for the Jets solely because of the way he left. I'm saying that he's a 15 and 17 head coach. He hasn't made the playoffs.
Right.
He's never been a play caller. And if you look at the dynamics of the Jets team, and people disagree with me on this as well, but this is just my opinion. If you look at the current state of affairs for this franchise, I think they need an innovative offensive mind to lead
who
this
is
team.
that?
That doesn't necessarily – I'll get to that in a second. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't hire a defensive coach. I mean, Dan Quinn to me is an exceptional guy. I haven't heard anything negative about him. I think he would be a good guy. I think a guy like Frank Reich, who might be green in some respects, he's been a play caller for only 1 year, and he's interviewing tomorrow. I think he could be a good fit. And I said, really, for the past month, I thought Josh McDaniels should have been a guy that they should at least bring in and talk to. So, that's just my opinion. Again, I understand it doesn't necessarily have to be an offensive play caller. That's just what I think this team needs at this moment right now.